Jared here from the Heel to the Face podcast with an additional video this week. Obviously, me and Brandon recorded our podcast just the other day talking about All In, some of the other big events in WWE and AEW, but the news broke today on what I think might be one of the biggest losses and what-ifs in WWE history. I have to say, this is one of the biggest losses in professional wrestling, probably since around Chris Benoit in 2007, and that is Bray Wyatt, 36 years old, passed away today. So far, the details are a little murky, and nobody knows yet exactly the reason for the reason of his passing here on August the 24th, 2023. The last we saw Bray Wyatt in the professional wrestling world was around February when he was challenging Bobby Lashley to a match at WrestleMania. The match got scrapped. Bray Wyatt just disappeared, as he did prior to that a few years earlier after WrestleMania 37 in Tampa, where he lost in just a few seconds to Randy Orton. Disappeared. Didn't come back until Extreme Rules 2022, scheduled to wrestle this year at WrestleMania. He had the pitch black match at the Royal Rumble, which was his only pay-per-view match on his most recent return, where he took on LA Knight pre the super push that he's getting right now. But LA Knight and Bray Wyatt in a pitch black match sponsored by Mountain Dew at the Royal Rumble, his only pay-per-view match after his return at Extreme Rules in Philadelphia last October. A lot of questions about that match, about, Uncle Howdy and all the stuff that he was adding to his character this time around. And the thing is, he's always adding stuff to his character. WWE is always trying to make you wonder, what does this all mean? And then he disappears in February. Not a lot of stuff was brought out on why he disappeared in February. Later on, we found out from some sources, not WWE, that he was fighting what was a life-threatening illness, but most recently, the news broke that he was nearing a return to WWE. And all through this time, they were still selling his merchandise, even though to limited numbers. But at every single show, you could find one kind of hidden Bray Wyatt thing, whether it was one of the mask or a random t-shirt. But they were still essentially showing that he was in WWE and that he hasn't left WWE. He was scheduled to be a downloadable character on the most recent WWE video game. But Bray Wyatt, one of the ones who passed away with a lot of what-ifs and a lot of wondering about his potential. Now, we know Terry Funk passed away this past week, and at 79 years old, he was somewhat considered young, especially for somebody who we thought was going to wrestle literally until he couldn't wrestle anymore. But he had a 50-year career behind him, and there really wasn't any more highlights, any more what-ifs with Terry Funk. But with Bray Wyatt, that is definitely not the case. He came into WWE's developmental around 2009, came into WWE originally as Husky Harris, but then they turned the character around and he became Bray Wyatt. He met up with the Wyatt family, now the passing of Luke Harper, a.k.a. Brody Lee, who passed away a few years ago, and Rowan, who's still kicking around, and he's made a few AEW appearances and independent wrestling appearances, but the Wyatt family was very over. He had a lot of WrestleMania appearances. While he was in the Wyatt family, he won the championship at one time, and he ended up losing it to Randy Orton at WrestleMania 33 in Orlando, in the infamous match that had all the weird stuff that was on the mat that was being projected. But he had the championship into WrestleMania 33 before losing it to Randy Orton that year. And then took some time off. And when he came back a couple years later as the Firefly Funhouse individual Bray Wyatt. I mean, he had, Sister Abigail and his whole Firefly Funhouse cast of characters. And at one time, Alexa Bliss, which, again, seemed to be very vaguely how that was all tying in. But we never really got to know the full story. They always kept us wondering what was next, what this all means. But he came back in probably his most popular character, which was The Fiend, where he was Bray Wyatt, and then he was The Fiend, and very popular character. And like I said, at WrestleMania 37 with The Fiend, he kind of disappeared. He suffered a string of losses and took off from the business for a little bit. But when he came back Extreme Rules 2022, he came back with a little bit different persona. The whole Uncle Howdy thing started to appear, and wondering, were we going to get a Bray Wyatt versus Uncle Howdy match? A lot of people were wondering who Uncle Howdy was. It's kind of weird now because Bo Dallas recently made his debut on AEW. This past week, so that whole time of wondering who Uncle Howdy was, and just always wondering what it all meant, what it was all for. We all know that when Bray Wyatt came out, one thing was for sure, is we were entertained. He was a character like nothing else, similar to The Undertaker, but probably that character even more extreme. For those people like myself who love horror movies, Bray Wyatt was an awesome character. The Fiend was an awesome character, and he was, like I said, whether the matches themselves were the greatest things you've ever seen, because sometimes, they weren't, but his character himself sold a lot of t-shirts, sold a lot of masks, and always was one of those characters where the entrance got you on your feet and made you, if you weren't a wrestling fan, kind of stand at attention. And it was one of those characters that I showed a lot of my friends who aren't wrestling fans, because it transcended not just wrestling, but it was such a mix of so many things. For those who love comic books, for those who love horror movies, for those who love scary things in general, but also those who love professional wrestling, and those who love a good mystery, because again, with the Alexa Bliss tie-in, we were always wondering what this all means, what's coming next, what is the point of all of this. It was always a to be continued with the most recent Bray Wyatt character and that of the Firefly Funhouse character, and something WWE has essentially never done before, and it would be hard pressed to see them doing it again, because Bray Wyatt played the character perfectly. But he disappeared in February before his match with Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania. Bobby Lashley ended up not having a match at WrestleMania, and it made us all wonder what happened. And I went to WrestleMania, and I went to the Superstore, and Bray Wyatt was still there being advertised. He's still a part of the company, but it was never explained where he went. And then today, Triple H put out the tweet that he had talked to Mike Rotundo, formerly known as IRS in WWE, and formerly a Syracuse University wrestling standout prior to his time in the WWF. But he had announced to Triple H that Bray Wyatt has passed. I thought, it's such crazy news to have a talent essentially in the prime of their career. Now, while he wasn't in the ring, we were still wondering, but he was in the prime of his career in the sense of he was always in the thought of, even though he wasn't necessarily currently on a WWE storyline, we were always wondering where he was. I mean, that's why I contribute to this, to Chris Benoit or the passing of Eddie Guerrero, because those people were in our conscience. Those were on the current video games. They were, if they weren't in the match, you were wondering where they were. And with Bray Wyatt, he wasn't currently around. He didn't currently have any matches scheduled, but we were wondering when he was making his return. And we were excited for it. Last year, he made his return at Extreme Rules, and that was the biggest moment of Extreme Rules. The biggest moment of that Extreme Rules pay-per-view was him making his return. And him making his return again, I imagine, was going to be a huge moment in WWE. Whether, like I said, you think his matches were 5-star matches or not, I guess we'll look back, and I'm personally one who doesn't like WrestleMania 36 at all, but now I can't help but look back fondly more on his Firefly Funhouse match with John Cena. Whether you think it's a match or not is up to be determination, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that Bray Wyatt could do. He could find a way to be the most entertaining thing essentially throughout COVID, because his character transcended that. His character was one that you could watch in a scripted and, essentially not live program, because it wasn't just about his in-ring abilities, but it was about the character itself. And it's always going to leave us with a question of, what could have been, and, what could have been, not just with the passing and the future of Bray Wyatt, but now it makes us look back at the stuff that had essentially no endings in his career, all those to be continueds, and we were hoping that someday down the line, everything would get sewn up, all come back together. We'd have the answers to all the questions we had. Firefly Funhouse, Bray Wyatt, Alexa Bliss, the whole 9 yards. But unfortunately, we'll never get the answers to any of those questions. I imagine next week we will talk a lot of Bray Wyatt on the Heel to the Face podcast, as well as all the things for next week, Payback, and so much more. But for Jared, this has been another video from the Heel to the Face podcast. Bray Wyatt has passed away August 24th, 2023, at the age of 36.